All right, let's go. So welcome to our lecture today on European expansion into Asia. So the Portuguese sailors are the first ones to venture into the Indian Ocean, exploring new trade routes. They seized strategic ports and established trading posts along the coasts of Africa and Asia. This allows them to dominate the lucrative spice trade between Europe and Asia. The Portuguese trading empire brought immense wealth and power to the small Iberian nation. Alfonso de Albuquerque was a strategic genius who led Portuguese's expansion into the Indian Ocean. He captures key ports and establishes fortified bases, allowing Portugal to build a vast commercial empire. Albuquerque's military conquests are crucial in creating Portugal's trading network across the region. Now, the main two areas that the Portuguese establish are Goa, which is established as the Portuguese capital in 1510 and is an important center of trade. And in 1511, the Portuguese seized the city of Malacca after a violent conquest, displacing the existing Muslim inhabitants and establishing control over this strategic location along the spice trade. You may remember this from our Black Death unit when we were looking at that little pinch point in between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. That's where Malacca is. So between these two strongholds, the Portuguese have consolidated the power in the Indian Ocean, and they will remain dominant throughout much of the 16th century. Now, the Portuguese established a vast trading network with outposts along the coastlines of the Indian Ocean. You can see from this map here. Although through this network, they're able to control the lucrative spice trade, giving them a virtual monopoly, which means they are the only Europeans allowed in and out of these trading areas. This allowed them to amass a vast amount of wealth and become one of the most powerful and prosperous maritime powers of the era. The Portuguese are able to establish control over such coastal regions, but struggle to conquer and maintain power over inland territories. And while the Portuguese sought trade with China, they could not do it by force, but they had to seek permission. The Portuguese also lacked military power necessary to effectively maintain their vast colonial empire across the globe. Now, the Portuguese were religiously intolerant. One example is the Hindu persecution, where conquerors would destroy temples in the territories that they had conquered, seeking to erase the local religious practices. Another example is their treatment of Muslims, where they would often attack pilgrim ships on their way to Mecca, preventing people from freely practicing their faith. These are just two instances of a broader pattern of religious intolerance that has caused immense suffering and conflict over the centuries. Now, by the end of the 16th century, or 1599, a Dutch fleet returns to Amsterdam with valuable Asian cargo, sparking the Dutch desire to explore the spice trade. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company is founded, allowing them to expand their network even further. And they, in fact, capture the city of Malacca in 1641, supplanting the Portuguese and opening up the lucrative trade routes to Asia. The Dutch East India Company is one of the great inventions, I would argue, in the modern world. It's a very powerful trading company, and it has sovereign powers, including the ability to wage war and to govern territories. They also built their own naval fleet that they could use for both trade and warfare. The company was skilled in diplomacy and negotiated treaties with rulers across Asia to facilitate their trading companies. The headquarters was located in Amsterdam, which was a bustling commercial center at the time. So, turning now to the Spanish. Magellan's voyage in 1521 claims the Philippines for King Philip of Spain, marking Spain's entrance into trade in the Indian Ocean. And over the next 15 years, the Spanish carried out a military campaign that would subdue the various indigenous kingdoms across the islands that are today known as the Philippines. Once Spain conquers the Philippines, they force the population to convert to Catholicism and establish Manila as the major trading hub, connecting the Philippines with Spain's growing global empire. Now, in India, the Mughal dynasty was a key player in the global economy because it was a key hub for the spice trade. It was the world's leading producer of high-quality textiles, exporting those fabrics around the world. And the Mughal Empire was not afraid of the Europeans and granted them trading rights initially, giving them easy access to India's markets and resources. This made the Mughals extremely important economically and as a geopolitical center of activity for the period. Now, as the empire begins to decline, uh, there becomes one of the key factors for this decline is a shift away from its earlier religious tolerance under the Mughal rulers, who are Muslims. Um, this intolerance led to conflicts between the two major groups in India, Hindus and Muslims, and weakened the empire's stability. Another important factor was the growing civil unrest, where these Hindu-Muslim tensions destabilized the empire. Externally, European powers, particularly the British and the French, exploit these divisions and their weaknesses and expand their own influence and presence in the region, often through the use of trading arms. Eventually, the British will, through their East India Company, will build up a formidable military force, including a private army and a private navy. They also recruited local Indians who became known as sepoys and mixed their forces in with the British. Over time, the company gradually expands its territorial control, taking over most of the Indian subcontinent. The East India Company will again establish economic dominance and monopolize trade in the regions that it controls. This combination of military power, territorial expansion, and economic control will allow the British to firmly establish their control over India. Now, China was a little different. It viewed Europeans as uncivilized barbarians, but the Europeans were eager to get all of that good Chinese stuff, the Chinese silks, porcelains, tea. However, there's a major trade imbalance because China doesn't want any of the European trade goods in exchange, so it demands gold and silver for its exports, and this creates a really challenging relationship as China is pulling gold and silver out of Europe. Now, the city of Macau was an important Portuguese trading post near the city in Canton in China. And Macau was kind of this area where the Chinese allowed Europeans to come in and trade. However, the government was very strict on them, confining European traders into the city of Canton and even forcing them to leave the city at the end of each trading year. It, along along with the Portuguese and other European traders, Jesuit missionaries travel into China in the 16th and 17th centuries, seeking to convert the Chinese elite and the upper class scholars to Christianity. This doesn't work all that well. At the same time, though, however, the Jesuits are sharing European knowledge and techniques in areas that the Chinese are interested in, specifically in map making and astronomy. And figures like Matteo Ricci shown here in traditional Chinese dress are able to integrate the Chinese society and build relationships. The Jesuits' scientific contributions, like introducing accurate map making and calendar systems, also helped raise their status and their influence in the imperial court, and will get us into trouble later on. Now, the Qing dynasty rises to power in the 17th century. The Qing are actually not Chinese. They are Mongolian or Manchu invaders from the north who conquered China in 1644. But under Qing rule, China expands to its largest territorial extent by 1796, creating the largest empire in the world at the time. This period also marked great economic growth, a population boom expanded, and industrial expansion as more and more people go into porcelain and silk making. The Qing dynasty's foreign trade policies led to a series of misunderstandings, particularly with Britain. When the British goods, Lord Macartney comes on a British envoy mission, and his goods that he's trying to trade are mistaken for tribute, which causes tension. He is not expecting to offer them to the emperor. The other problem is that he refuses to participate in the kowtow ritual, in which a foreigner would come and kneel before the emperor and touch his head to the floor 9 times. As a sign that and then becoming the emperor's vassal. But as a representative of the King of England, he saw himself as co-equal to the emperor, and this caused the trading mission to essentially fail. Now, so China is the big player at the time, and tiny little Korea that sits on the peninsula attached to mainland China has been devastated by invasions over and over again. The two biggest invasions in the early 16th centuries are from Japan, and then when the Japanese are defeated, the Manchus or the Qing come in and take over the Korean Peninsula. Once though this period of time, when the Koreans are finally able to remove the foreign powers from their land, they become very isolationist. They cut off all contact with European powers and anything from the outside world. It will keep them isolated. Korea will remain isolated for almost 2 centuries. Now, Japan initially is open to the outside world and allows for increased trade and religious tolerance, partially because Japan is facing a period of civil war here. And into this lack of centralized leadership, missionaries are also able to enter and initially spread Christianity. You might remember that Francis Xavier initially lands in Japan. He's able to have a quite successful mission. The Tokugawa, who are one of the clans fighting in the Japanese Civil War, start acquiring firearms from the Europeans, and allows them to eventually win the war and take control of Japan. And when they do that, they start to realize what's happening elsewhere in Europe. Japan's leaders are specifically alarmed by the Portuguese conquests in the Philippines. And they begin to fear that influence. And in 1638, the Tokugawa shogunate bars foreigners from entering Japan. And this policy is driven by the desire to prevent the spread of Christianity. And Japanese Christians face severe persecution because the Tokugawa are afraid that these Christians are going to be loyal to the Pope and not to the emperor or their local lords. So you can see the Europeans have tremendous influence in this area. There are vast economic changes as new trade routes are created. Politics shifts as the Europeans change the balance of power, contributing to the collapse of the Mughals to the rise of the Tokugawa in Japan. And you continue to see those cultural and religious exchanges that we've seen since the beginning of our class this year. So I hope this quick little lecture introduces you to the Europeans beginning to gain footholds in Asia.